Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please, Mrs. Meltzer.
Thank you. Mrs. West?
Here.
Mr. Keys?
Here.
Mr. Pearl?
Here.
Mr. Cannon?
Here.
Mr. Aragona?
Here.
Mr. Gilliam?
Here.
Mrs. Meltzer here.
Additions or deletions?
Yes, we do have one add-on, item number 10, request to adopt resolution for a moratorium on advancing storage facilities and direct planning director to commence forthwith revising ordinances for storage facilities.
So
Submitted by
moved.
Supervisor.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Support.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mr. Pearl?
Yes.
Mr. Keys?
Yes.
Mrs. West?
Yes.
Mr. Cannon?
Yes.
Mr. Aragona?
Yes.
Mr. Gilliam?
Yes.
Mrs. Meltzer, yes. Motion.
Thank you. Welcome to your Township Board meeting this evening. If you have anything you'd like to say on any item as it comes before the board, please come to the podium and clearly give us your name and address for the record. If you have something you'd like to talk about that's not part of the agenda, please fill out a public comment card. It's in the front of the room to your left. We have one public service announcement this evening regarding our blood drive. Mr. Gilliam.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor and board members, for your indulgence. It is that time of year again when I begin, I don't want to say harassing members of the community, but, the person that collects taxes and also helps to manage and organize the Clinton Township Community-Wide Blood Drive. Those are two very important things to ask for, but of course, they both help the community in very distinct ways. The Clinton Township Blood Drive, it is the 21st annual blood drive. It's something that predates me. It was very much run by my predecessor, who was the treasurer for many, many years. And this has risen to be one of the longest lasting and continuous and largest blood drives in all of Southeast Michigan. And it is that way because it is a true community partnership. It's the schools, it's the business community, it is the libraries, it is the Township Senior Center, it's the organization and the time that we put in from my staff that makes this thing a very, very big and
Successful.
life-saving, successful blood drive. And so it will be held this year, and I'm sure the cable folks have the flyer, so they'll put it up there for folks if they have it available. But Tuesday, February 4th, and Wednesday, February 5th. And to schedule an appointment, we have locations at both Clintondale High School, Chippewa Valley High School, both of our libraries in Clinton Township, the main branch, the south branch, as well as the Clinton Township Senior Center here. So for more information and to schedule an appointment, you can call 586-286-1768. And online to schedule an appointment, redcrossblood.org, and the sponsor code is Clinton Township. And of course, our flyer this year, 80s themed. We've got the power to save lives. Let's pump up the blood supply.
Good.
So with that, I have little cards. And so I'm going to go ahead and pass a few of those out. If you want more, they're available in my office, but I'll ask that you take a pile of them, get them out, help us increase the amount of donors that we have.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We appreciate all who are involved. I do believe, though, that Nancy White started this.
It was started by Nancy White, and then
ago.
Bill kind of took it over from there.
Yep.
Mr. Cannon, can I make just one quick announcement?
Yes.
Thank you. Just a reminder, the March 10th presidential primary is coming up. We did send out absentee ballot applications, and we've gotten quite a those returned to us, and ballots will be mailed out to absentee voters on February 5th. So you can start to look for those in the mail, February 6th. And you'll look at, you'll find them probably that following day or the next day in your mailbox.
Thank you. And with that, we'll take item number 1, introduction of applicants for the Parks and Recreation Committee.
Dear board members, there are 3 terms up for appointment on the Parks and Recreation Committee. Terms are for 2 years to expire November 30th, 2021. Rachel Riggs and Chad Huddle have submitted their applications for reappointment. No other applications have been received at this time, and the remaining position will be reposted. Per the policy guidelines, an invitation has been extended to all applicants to attend the January 21st, 2020 board meeting, in which they will be provided an opportunity to introduce themselves to the Board of Trustees, whereby each being given a 3-minute time limit in which to do so. Thank you for your attention in this matter. Sincerely, Stephanie Middlestat, Administrative Assistant.
Thank you. Neither are here this evening. They are both current members of the committee.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, since there's reappointments and there's no other people that have applied, I know we're going to go out for another reposting, but I'd like to move that we appoint the two.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. West. Roll call, please.
Mr. Pearl.
Yes.
Mrs. West.
Yes.
Mr. Keys.
Yes.
Mr. Cannon.
Yes.
Mr. Argona.
Yes.
Mr. Gilliam.
Yes.
Mrs. Meltzer, yes. Motion passes.
Thank you. And item 2 is introduction of applicants for the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Dear board members, there are 2 terms up for appointment on the Zoning Board of Appeals due to term expiration. These terms are for 3 years to expire December 31st, 2022. Ken Pearl has submitted his application for reappointment, and David Merrill has submitted his application for appointment, which were previously sent to you for your review. No other applications were received. Per the policy guidelines, an invitation has been extended to all applicants to attend the January 21st, 2020 board meeting, in which they will be provided an opportunity to introduce themselves to the Board of Trustees, whereby each being given a 3-minute time limit in which to do so. Thank you for your attention in this matter. Sincerely, Stephanie Middlestat, Administrative Assistant.
Thank you, and both are in attendance this evening. Mr. Pearl, did you wish to make any comments?
Just, I've enjoyed serving on the Zoning Board of Appeals. It's a very important board, and I think I've done my homework at every meeting, made sure I saw the items that we were addressing, and researched everything, and I appreciate the reappointment if the board moves it.
Thank you. Mr. Merrill, did you wish to take up to 3 minutes?
I don't know if I'll take quite 3 minutes, but good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the board. My name is David Merrill. I live at 41075 Damask Drive here in Clinton Township. I believe I know most of you, and, you know, I just want to be able to have an opportunity to serve my community, show that my children that it's important that we give back to the community that we live in. I do run a business here in Clinton Township. I feel that I can make good decisions as long as homework's made, make decisions on what is in the best interest of the community, especially being that I have a vested interest here in the township. I appreciate your guys' consideration for this position, and I hope you guys have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Again, we have 2 applicants for 2 positions. It would be my recommendation that we make the appointments this evening, if the board so desires.
So moved.
Support.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Meltzer, yes. Mr. Aragona.
Yes.
Mrs. West.
Yes.
Mr. Keys.
Yes.
Mr. Pearl.
Yes.
Mr. Cannon.
Yes.
Mr. Gilliam.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 3, recommendation of MKSK proposal for the Groesbeck Highway Market Study and Corridor Plan.
On March 1st, 2019, the Planning and Community Development Department issued an RFP for the M97 Groesbeck Highway Market Study Analysis and Corridor Plan. On October 25th, 2019, 3 proposals were submitted. The proposals were reviewed by the Planning and Community Development Department staff, and the firm MKSK was chosen as the preferred candidate. On January 9th, 2020, the Planning Commission reviewed the MKSK proposal and voted unanimously to recommend that the Township Board approve MKSK as the consultant for this project. Attached is MKSK proposal for your review and consideration. In summary, the process will provide the township with a market analysis designed to provide input on mixed-use development potential and actions for stimulating economic development, and provides the township with a set of design guidelines for use specifically toward the redevelopment of the Groesbeck corridor. The design guidelines will be approved as an amendment to the master plan, while the market study will be provided as a separate report. We submit this recommendation for your consideration. Sincerely, Bruce Thompson, Director of the Department of Planning and Community Development.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Is there anything you'd like to add to this?
Just briefly, yeah. I mean, obviously, all the township board members know one of the main reasons I was brought on board was to focus on Groesbeck and revitalize that corridor and focus on redevelopment and development of the few parcels that are left. And it's a very unique corridor. And I think bringing a firm in like MKSK to help us do that, to facilitate meetings, to build consensus, is going to help us both in the long term and the short term with these site development guidelines. If you recall, we just updated the master plan, and there's a method to my madness, if you will. The reason I created a separate, or I asked for creation of a separate master plan designation for the Groesbeck corridor was just for that reason. And then it kind of walks into this particular plan where we create guidelines that become a part of our master plan. So when we see sites being redeveloped or developed in this, we can refer to the master plan and say, this is what the township said the buildings in these sites need to start looking like to start improving this corridor. So I think you'll be very pleased. I'm sure you've all seen the proposal. I think their resume, both the MKSK and the consultant that they're going to partner with on the market study speaks for themselves. These are folks that are very good at doing what they do. And so I just looking forward to getting this started. I think it goes times out well with the strategic planning process that we're in as well. I know that Groesbeck has been a point of discussion throughout that process, so I think it's a great next step, if you will, to start implementing what we've heard from the strategic planning process that people want for this community.
Thank you. Mr. Aragona?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. At the Planning Commission, when we were discussing this, there's two things that that came out, and I'd like you to be able to share that with this board. And if you want to do it, or I see the representative from MKSK is here, that'd be great. If you could go over the timeline for one, and it sounds like it's actually going to be a little bit shorter than what's even in here. That's at least what the aim is. And then if you can also briefly go over the market study, the firm that's being partnered with for the market study, that MKSK is contracting for the market study, who they are and kind of what they're going to be doing for the township, if that's all right.
Sure, if I can, I'll introduce, this is Brad Strader. He's the principal at MKSK. I think he's probably best suited for answering those questions. Not that we haven't had that discussion, but I'll let Brad.
Good evening again. Yes, Brad Strader. I'm the principal that runs the Detroit office of MKSK, and I would be the principal in charge on this project. So in terms of the timeline, we have 5 steps in the proposal process, and the idea right now is to get through step 4 by May 1st or sometime in May. And so sort of the first step is getting started in the process, collecting data, getting a public engagement and a stakeholder engagement process lined up, scheduling things really to have an accelerated, efficient schedule. It's really good to have a really in-depth discussion of all the expectations and so forth. And sort of the second step is to do the market analysis. I'll talk about that in a minute. A market snapshot and start looking at options in terms of one of the focus points is design guidelines. So what is design guidelines? What type of architecture? What type of landscaping? How much flexibility? What kind of non-motorized facilities do we want? And a key thing, as we talked about with the Planning Commission, is what are the thresholds where you would expect an upgrade to landscaping or lighting or architecture? Because if somebody wants to change use or put an addition on, we want to encourage economic development and reinvestment, so we have to have reasonable standards for design guidelines to bring it from where it is today up to everybody's expectations. Some of that is going to be gradual over time. The idea if there's a major new development, a tear down or a vacant lot, that they'd apply all the standards now. But the tricky thing on corridors like this is what is the upgrade you're looking for when there's a change in use or a minor expansion, so you don't end up with vacant buildings. So we'll look at options, so forth. And the third month is sort of, our third step is deciding what we're going to do, what are going to be the design guidelines, what is the market study telling us. The fourth step is coming up with a draft plan. And then the fifth step is the adoption process. So the goal is in May to have a draft plan. As Bruce mentioned, it's going to be an amendment to the master plan. So then we would go through the Planning Commission back to the board to start the public review process, which is 62 days after you authorize it. So the adoption process can be 3 or 4 months, but the goal is to have a really good solid draft that everyone's comfortable with in May. And in terms of the market analysis, Sharon Woods is a principal of Land Use USA. They're a market firm based out of the Lansing area. I've worked with them all across the state of Michigan. They work beyond Michigan as well. They're probably the #1 firm on projects like this in the state of Michigan. We were lucky to get Sharon committed on our team because she was asked after we asked her, by 3 other firms to be on the team. So everybody kind of knows on a project like this, she's the best fit. And I think she gave us preferred status. She does a lot of work for the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, so she's one of their preferred market specialists on, they call it target market analysis for housing and mixed-use development. So she's sort of specialist at and does a lot of lecturing. She has two kind of components in this project. What is included in the proposal is sort of a market snapshot. She's going to look at the corridor, look at statistics and so forth, interview some of the brokers and business owners and operators, and look at comparable corridors based on her experience and say, here's where I think the market is, here's the types of uses we should really market toward, here's some strategies for mixed-use development and so forth. And then at the request of the township, there's a second phase that would be an option, and there are a number of varieties on phase 2 that would be add-ons if you wanted. One could be promotional material. She has a lot of really good contacts with major franchises and investors, so she could help put together recruitment materials, more seminars for business owners and operators of how to expand your business, how to add uses or activities or services that would improve your market, how to go about marketing yourself, and then also a more detailed statistical analysis, like looking at gaps in the market and so forth. So we're not always sure when we start something like this, you don't want to spend $60,000 in a market study when you don't need all that. So the idea is get her and you familiar with her familiar with the corridor, and decide if you need something else, she would be very familiar with the corridor and then could seamlessly move into the next step if there is a next step on the market. So the end result of the plan would be a master plan amendment, a set of design guidelines that could be a foundation for ordinance amendments, and then also a market study that you could use to understand what the potential is, but also to help identify if you want to go after recruiting particular types of uses or talk to particular property owners and get them excited. We find out a lot of times in this process, property owners just need a little bit of a push. I never thought of this. I didn't know the township's doing something. And a lot of it is just persuading them to do something. So,
Thank you. Comments or questions of board members?
So it's Brad, right?
yes.
Okay, Brad. So read the proposal. It's very detailed. I think it's a very tight timeline to be able to produce this. The one thing that, did you drive Groesbeck?
I drove it multiple times and I walked it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So walked it. That's pretty good.
And I
Right.
surprisingly saw other people walking, and so the photos in the proposal I took, and I was surprised to see people not just at Metro Parkway, but elsewhere walking, sometimes randomly though, not at signalized crossings, and sometimes I didn't get a good photo of them. But I was a little surprised how many people are actually walking along the corridor where there are sidewalks, but even where there aren't sidewalks. So.
Yeah. So I grew up near 14 Mile Road in between Gratiot and Groesbeck. And, you know, it's like Gratiot was our commercial district and Groesbeck was our sort of very fast speed. It was the mom and pop tier 3 automotive suppliers, the defense work, the gritty industrial, with the businesses mixed in that always struggle. And so I'm encouraged, but I'm looking at the experience and the things that you provided, and I'm seeing more of the commercial sort of applications and examples of corridors that you've done versus sort of this Groesbeck. Give me like, just from your observations, what's your best sort of like project that you've worked on that's close?
So it's funny because the Planning Commission asks the same thing, and I don't think, so I've done about 70, 80 corridor plans, kind of my specialty. And there's not really one like Groesbeck because of the mixture. You've got some single-family homes, some multiple family, some new condos, some old, so much industrial and service mixed in with commercial, because usually a corridor is all commercial, or it's commercial and residential, or it's all industrial. And probably the best comp I could think of when the Planning Commission asked would be like State Road and State Street in Ann Arbor going into Pittsfield Township. So two different communities. We got a mall and commercial, but then when you go into Pittsfield, it's residential and industrial and new kind of corporate and office. And then little bits and pieces of some corridors I've worked on outside of Grand Rapids in the Cleveland area are similar to part of this corridor, but Groesbeck is, there isn't like a comparable to Groesbeck that I can find. There's bits and pieces of it. So I think that makes Groesbeck a little more challenging. I worked on the Gratiot corridor plan with SEMCOG and MDOT and Clinton Township and 9 other communities about 10 years ago. And that corridor was a lot simpler to do than this one probably. So, and you have to have design standards that will work for these different uses. When I'm dealing with the city of Romulus now, where we have a meeting tomorrow on architecture for somebody that wants refrigeration units, and the city's architectural standards are written more for offices and typical industrial, but refrigeration kind of companies can't have the kind of materials that the architects wanted to see. And when you have a corridor like Groesbeck, you've got to have flexible standards that are adaptive to the use. There's not going to be, you're not going to have, everything's not going to look the same, because industrial buildings and operations are different than commercial and different than residential. So we want to have some complementary features, and that might be landscaping or lighting, but have some flexibility in the architecture, so.
Okay, okay. Yeah, and I'm trying not to ask you questions that sort of prejudge the, the outcome that, you're going to spend this time working to arrive at. But, what were the deliverables on some of these other projects? It was what are the, so, and just to give you some background, I used to serve at the county level. And in the wake of the economic crisis, where you saw all these mom and pop shops drying up, and we're like, you take a look at the state's economic development incentives, and they're along Mound Road, and they're along Van Dyke, and they're along, all of these other areas. And then I said, give me a map of the county with all of the vacant industrial property. And they gave me a map, and the pings were off the chart on Groesbeck. So now, the economy's going again. Manufacturing is back, still with its struggles. But it's what are the deliverables in these areas that you've worked on that we are sort of looking forward to? And the thing that really intrigues me is the mixed use.
So and this is where Sharon will be helpful. So usually market studies are more in the commercial or residential and less in industrial. So that's why probably the proposal reads that way. The flexibility needed, so when you have a saturation of commercial, which if you combine Gratiot and Groesbeck and some of the other corridors in this part of Macomb County, I work with Shelby Township and other communities in Macomb and Oakland County, and we've got a saturation of commercial, and some of the buildings they have out there aren't adaptive to some of the uses that are going to be out there. So I don't know the statistics yet, Sharon would say, but one of the things we need to be ready for is what are some reuses of those mom and pop areas or the vacant buildings and vacant sites. And that's probably mixed use, but mixed use might not be what you may be thinking. It may be residential. It may be horizontal mixed use, meaning residential in part and an office or flex space in the front. It may be a little bit of vertical, but it's probably horizontal. And the thought is that it's probably going to be more residential. If you planned this corridor 10 and 20 years ago, you would think there won't be any residential. It's all going to be industrial, commercial. We might have to flip that thinking and look at mixed use or some more residential on this corridor. So different than the corridor you grew up with. So,
Okay.
And probably trying to understand what everybody's looking for in those industrial, quasi-industrial, consumer service buildings, and make sure that, because you got some really nice sort of light industrial, I call it consumer industrial, serving the public too. You've got some nice enclaves there, and I think building around those. So it might be nodes or pockets of that development still. So.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Well, so and part of the reason why I think the board is so focused on this is that even though it's been sort of our industrial corridor, it's the road that gets people places. I mean, there's a major trunk line and a major part of our community here. So we look forward to the outcomes.
I guess a word of caution that I told the Planning Commission, since you asked about deliverables, to change a corridor like that or upgrade, it is going to take time. So I know the deliverable, because there's some corridors I've worked on where we did the design and 3 years later they rebuilt the road and we put in sidewalks and crossings and all the lighting, and it was a dramatic change within a couple of years. This is going to be more gradual. Could be some streetscape and working with MDOT. I do a lot of work with MDOT, some of it, working with MDOT with changes in the right-of-way. But a lot of this is going to be gradual and looking for precedent setting. So when developments are coming in 2020 and 2021, they're going to look a little bit different than the buildings that came in 5 years ago. But it is going to be gradual, not like instant deliverable like you might have been thinking.
Mrs. Meltzer?
Thank you, Mr. Cannon. Thank you for being here. It sounds exciting, what you're already talking about, the design standards and so on. I think one of the things that I'd like to see, and I grew up outside of this area, but because my family was involved in manufacturing, I grew up and we would travel down Groesbeck, and I don't remember feeling ever, even when I was younger, that it was, it looked industrial to me. And so I like the idea of this mixed use of residential, because residential demands beautification, and because of that, I think then it would translate into, some of the commercial buildings being, focusing on more beautification in the terms of more trees, more green. Definitely lighting is a big factor in terms of an ambiance and how that creates not just safety, but part of that beautification as well. So I'm excited to see the transformation, and it's, I think, long overdue. But again, we were hit really heavy and hard in 2009 with the recession, and even coming out of that today, manufacturing has rebounded, but certainly not to the extent that it was many years ago, and nor will I think it ever be again. Unfortunately, I hate to say that, because, as I said, my family's in the manufacturing industry, and we have been hit hard by that turn of economic events, and then even to try to come out of that has been very difficult. But manufacturing is where, we do want to maintain that. We do want to welcome that, because you have to make something in order to make an economy. So we truly believe in manufacturing. But I love the idea of the mixed use. I love the idea of looking at possibly, and I think I saw this, it was in Grand Rapids or Detroit, where they had a grocery store. Maybe it was Chicago now, that I think about it. It was some bigger city, but it was a grocery store, and on top of that was residential. And I thought that was really...
It's the new Meyer Market that's in Grand Rapids.
Yeah.
Because I do a lot of work in Grand Rapids.
Okay, and how is that going? How do you...
They're building a new one on Woodward at 13 Mile right now, the same format store. So that's, I used to do a lot of work for Meyer and so forth, so I've done a lot, and I think that's sort of their urban format, and that's took a big change in Meyer to be thinking mixed use, because they just were building their grocery stores, even to leave maybe some outlots, and they've changed their mentality. And I think some of the changes they've had came from them going to workshops on projects like this and saying, wow, they started out doing facades on some Meyers that looked, I kind of get blamed for that, because they said, you think about downtowns and so forth, and then they put up sort of, have you seen the Meyers with the little downtown facades, and they're okay, but they're not that authentic. And I think, but now Meyer with these urban Meyer stores are looking at mixed use, and I think we're seeing more acceptance of some of the retailers. You've got Target stores outside of Michigan that have residential above them. Not in Michigan yet, so I think that's a change. But when you're talking mom and pop and the smaller ones, that's hard. The mixed use is going to start with the bigger players, or maybe a few small builders, but generally it's going to be the franchises to start.
Well, there's certainly a lot of discussion about, because we lost Kroger at 16 in Groesbeck, replacing that with another type of grocery store. If there were a mixed use there, maybe it doesn't have all the shopping lanes that the Meyer has further north, but it might have enough in terms of food and quality groceries that people can, easily access at that location. If Meyer's, it wouldn't really be competing with itself. It is the same store. Would that be an option for that location?
Well, so that would be something that Sharon Woods could look at, as here's the market area and the incomes and so forth that could attract an Aldi's type or a new urban Meyer, or the different layers of grocery. I'm working with several other cities right now that are looking for grocery stores, and they just don't hit the mark of, it's pretty precise to put in a Kroger, a Meyer, so forth, and the demographics, population, traffic. We have the traffic volumes here, but there's a menu of selection criteria they look for, because they used to do site selection for Meyer. And Sharon will look at that, and she's very practical. So she doesn't tell you what you want to hear. She says, this is what the real market is. This is what you might have to do to change the market. So if there are aspirations for certain types of uses, she can tell you, this has possibility, or you're going to need this change to be able to attract that type of store. Here's the materials you need, or that's just maybe something you'd love to have, but right now it's not going to happen.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mr. Keys?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. I've been very excited about this project, and hearing you, and actually, I smiled pretty big when I heard you walk Groesbeck. I think that's some commitment there, because growing up, that's what we did. We rode our bike on Groesbeck to get to the McDonald's or to get to that Kroger, using the bike path to cross over. And I'm excited to see this board and under Mr. Thompson trying to develop tools, is kind of how you've described it to me, multiple tools in the toolbox to be able to bring Groesbeck back and redevelop that area. So this will be just one of those tools that we try to employ to do that. And some of the, I'm optimistic because some of the characteristics of Groesbeck you nailed in here. When we talk about the lack of lighting, the vacant buildings, we need to have these tools to bring up the bar on Groesbeck. And one key area that I appreciated in this is talking about designing guidelines for specific properties, ones that we know the community wants a specific resource coming out of, or a specific look, and actually taking a priority and telling the business and industry leaders what we want to see there. So I'll be supporting this. I'm optimistic and really excited about your commitment to it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? Member of the community?
Thank you.
Sam Bushel, 18546 Wayland. I was at the January 9th Planning Commission meeting, and I was worried because, and there again, I've let all of you know about it. It's a matter of, part of the thing was, forget, Mrs. Melcher said bring trees and such. Part of the thing was, on the redevelopment things, not to try to bring them up to the current thing. Get rid of the trees and landscaping. Don't worry about parking, no lighting. And so I think I'm very worried when the opening salvo of a proposal is, let's get rid of the minimum standards. I think part of it is, I think the township has been working on that already, because with the Duncan property, they're extending the building and such. They didn't have to go to site plan. Major Magics has not had to come here to get an entertainment permit. And none of them are being brought up to the current standards anyways. They're just being redeveloped into something else. And I think, I as a resident, I can't speak for anybody else but myself, I would like to make sure, if we're not going to go with the minimum standards on some of these properties, that there be some real big safeguards, that it's not open to backroom deals. And quite frankly, we've had enough of that in this township in the last several years. I think that you really need to set up some really strong, not just guidelines, but actual laws to cover, if you're going to let one place redevelop without any minimum standards, the next door neighbor is going to say, when they're totally redeveloping, they're going to say, hey, they didn't have to. And there again, it would be just at the ZBA the other night, one of the person that was appealing said, well, nobody else has that much setback. And what's funny is he's in a mixed, it's industrial next to a commercial. Well, I'm afraid you have to meet, I think you have to meet the minimum industrial standards, or you have to meet the minimum commercial standards, because I think if you go off willy-nilly without setting up standards, and there again, like when the opening salvo, anybody could watch this on the January 9th Planning Commission meeting, the opening salvo was, let's forget about the minimums. Thank you.
The floor is open for a motion.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion, but just to clarify, is the proposal for $54,000, Mr. Thompson?
Yes, it is. And if I could, Mr. Chairman, if I could ask that you approve a contingent upon the planning department working with the attorney's office at finalizing the contract language and executing the contract on your behalf.
Okay, also move.
Support.
Is there anything else, Mr. Thompson?
No.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Pearl.
Yes.
Mr. Keys.
Yes.
Mrs. West.
Yes.
Mr. Cannon.
Yes.
Mr. Aragona.
Yes.
Mr. Gilliam.
Yes.
Mrs. Melcher, yes. Motion passes.
Thank you. And item 4
Thank you.
is the Planning Commission 2019 Annual Report.
As you may be aware, the Planning Commission, under Public Act 33 of 2008 of the State of Michigan, is required to make a written annual report to the legislative body, the Township Board, concerning its operations and the status of planning activities, including recommendations regarding actions by the Township Board related to planning and development. At its regular meeting of January 9th, 2020, the Planning Commission voted to approve and forward the attached report to the Township Board. As always, if you have any questions, please contact the Planning Department at your convenience. Sincerely, Bruce Thompson, Director of the Department of Planning and Community Development.
Okay, I don't really have a whole lot else to add. I think this is the second one that has been prepared by my office for the Planning Commission. I'm trying to obviously meet the minimum standards of the statute, which says, this information has to be provided, but as well provide more statistical information that this board can use as they go throughout the year and, answer questions from the public. Once I get a couple more years under the belt as well, I can start doing potentially some comparative analysis as part of this plan to show you how the Planning Commission has been progressing as far as cases and types of cases and trends of development that are coming. So, I'm looking forward to trying to kind of expand this, but I think that you can see, if you look at the one from last year and this year, we were down a few cases, but the types of cases have changed, and I think you're going to continue to see that. You've heard me talk about the fact that we're running out of sites to develop, and the tougher sites are coming, and that's why PUD is now part of the toolbox that the Planning Commission that you have. You'll see we've had our first one this year, something new to this particular report. I think you'll start seeing more of those, and of course, if you have any questions about what's in this or what you have some suggestions about what you'd like to see, feel free to contact me anytime. But
Mr. Cannon,
Mrs. West?
thank you. Bruce, Parkdale Assisted Living, is that the old Concord?
yes.
Thank you. That's all I needed to know.
Mr. Cannon?
Yes.
If I could, Mr. Thompson, just because the St. Charbel Maronite Church is listed in there as well, I'm curious to know if there's an opportunity because of that exit out of there during, as church is let out, there is a problem at that light where, those that are wanting to go into Lakeside Mall, wanting to turn left, and I know this is a road commission issue, Department of Roads. However, I thought of possibly what other ways that we could make it easier on traffic by possibly making that church connect to some of the properties behind it or north of it. I think the walk-in is there, and could that create like a road for cars to go behind those existing buildings and then go out onto Hayes another way? If that was possible, if that's something that we could look at.
Well, it certainly is, and the zoning ordinance for the township actually does have language that encourages shared access and shared parking. And there are fine examples of it actually in the township where that type of thing does exist. I think one of the things that you have to understand is when it's new sites and you're building new sites and you're connecting them together, it's very easy because it's easy to plan those out and get the developer to agree to create shared access and easements and that. But when you've got older sites, it gets a little bit more difficult to get parties together to agree to have shared access and have shared easements. So it is something we can encourage, and I think ultimately, part of this Groesbeck corridor plan is to create guidelines, but it's also a first step at creating ordinances that follow those guidelines. One of my goals in the next year or so is to update the zoning ordinance. And I think we can beef up, if you will, the standards in the zoning ordinance that would encourage or require shared access to help mitigate traffic concerns like that. Right now the church relies on timing, right? Most of their traffic happens when mall traffic doesn't, and there's appropriate traffic signage that's up there. Of course, not everybody pays attention to traffic signage. I have to look at the chief when I say that, sorry. And so, yeah, there are better ways, but that's a team effort, right? Let's change our ordinances, let's build consensus, let's get the Planning Commission, the Zoning Board, and the Township Board together to say, we're going to take a stand and start requiring these things, so.
And I agree with that, because I think what I'm tired of the township always having to say, well, we have to rely on another governmental institution to deal with the problems that we have in our township. I would like to see us start to deal with our problems on our own and come up with solutions to fix things that we can address, as opposed to saying, well, we have to wait for the county road commission, or we have to wait for the state to weigh in on certain things. I want us to be more autonomous, and I know that isn't necessarily the problem, or isn't as a result of this board. It was a result of the changes that happened at the state and even at the federal level. But if we can look at changes that we can initiate like shared access and, you know, beautification and things that are going to stay in our community that we can control. We need more control over how this community looks, as opposed to saying it's somebody else's problem and we have to wait. And a perfect example of that was the road, you know, as we had a big snowfall and then the ice came after that, and we have to rely on the county to plow our roads. And, you know, it's just, it's very difficult because a lot of people come in and say, you know, there's a lot of negative consequences to that, and I won't go into detail, but it's just unfortunate when I have to say, gosh, you know what, we don't have that jurisdiction. So I'd like to, wherever we can, maintain jurisdiction over how we look and how we operate. I think that's more accountable to the people, and I think it's a better way to run government.
Thank you. Mr. Pearl?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Cannon. I like the report detail. I hope all the site plans that were approved actually get built. That would be nice. Just a comment for the public. Our Planning Commission and Zoning Board meetings are televised now, and I've talked to Mr. Thompson. We're going to work on, the Planning Department's going to work on getting the backup information online, not just the agenda, so that people can see what's being proposed before they turn it on, in case they want to watch it and they didn't realize what's being proposed. So the plans will be more detailed, instead of people coming in and not having access to those plans. You know, they'll have them in advance. We're going to have, I presume that we'll have it digitized, or that the petitioners will submit digital diagrams of their site plans so it can be put on.
And I'm happy to say, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, the Planning Commission gets their technology this upcoming Thursday. So after this Thursday, there is no more paper for the Planning Commission. Thanks to IT and thanks to the clerk's office, by the way, for helping facilitate this. We are going to go digital. The packets are available online. And so away we go.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And the packets have been available online for the Planning Commission for a while.
But not, but what about the backup? Is that available?
Yeah. for
They are
planning.
available online now.
Planning has.
Mr. Cannon?
Mr. Keys?
Yeah, I just appreciate Mr. Pearl's comments, because there was an item that came before the ZBA that I had called Mr. Pearl about and said, you know, I had multiple questions, and I thought that backup would be helpful. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and I'm looking forward to providing as much information as we can online for residents for these committee meetings.
Thank you. The floor is open for a motion to receive and file,
So moved.
Support.
supported by Mr. Pearl. Roll call, please.
Mr. Keys?
Yes.
Mr. Pearl?
Yes.
Mrs. West?
Yes.
Mr. Cannon?
Yes.
Mr. Argona?
Yes.
Mr. Gilliam?
Yes.
Mrs. Melter, yes. Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 5, request approval to attend the 2020 conference.
Dear Honorable Board members, I'm writing to seek approval to send firefighter paramedic Ryan Amarino to the Tyler Connect 2020 conference from April 26th to the 29th, 2020 in Orlando, Florida. Ryan was chosen from a select group to represent our area at the conference, as he has been very involved as both a user and advisor for our Tyler Technologies platforms. Our new world reporting system, which is required through our Comtech affiliation, will be discussed, as well as several of the other training and scheduling platforms that are being used by the Clinton Township Fire Department to improve our operations. The fact that Ryan will have a voice in many of the upcoming changes to these systems should prove to be very valuable. The estimated cost of the conference will be $2,965. Approximately $1,305 will come from the 2019-20 budget cycle, while the remaining $1,660 will be planned for the 2021 budget cycle. Thank you for your consideration, and if you should have any questions, please feel free to contact me at any time. Sincerely, Tim Duncan, Clinton Township Fire Chief.
This is a very necessary training for a very qualified firefighter.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you.
Support?
Roll call, please.
Mrs. West?
Yes.
Mr. Argona?
Yes.
Mr. Keys?
Yes.
Mr. Pearl?
Yes.
Mr. Cannon?
Yes.
Mr. Gilliam?
Yes.
Mrs. Melter, yes. Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 6, approval of appointment to a part-time media specialist position.
Dear members of the board, the Department of Community Relations and Media Services is recommending the Township Board appoint Mr. Christian Lupo to the position of part-time media specialist. The recommendation is based upon civil service testing and an interview conducted by department management. As a condition of employment, he will be required to successfully complete a background investigation and a pre-employment medical examination, including drug screen. Mr. Lupo's starting hourly wage, his hourly wage will be $19.92 as specified in the non-represented employee pay and benefits policy. Upon Township Board approval, his starting date will be January 22nd, 2020. Thank you for your consideration of this matter. Sincerely, William Smith, Human Resources Director.
Thank you, and this is a budgeted position. It's open simply because longtime media person John Brooks retired, and Dave Perzak was appointed to that position after being tested and interviewed. So that left this opening, and I'm recommending that we fill it this
I'll
evening.
make a motion to approve.
Thank you.
Support.
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. West?
Yes.
Mr. Pearl?
Yes.
Mr. Keys?
Yes.
Mr. Cannon?
Yes.
Mr. Argona?
Yes.
Mr. Gilliam?
Yes.
Mrs. Melcher, yes. Motion passes.
Thank you. And item 7 is a budget amendment for repair and maintenance of the police station.
Dear committee members, I'm requesting a budget amendment in our current 2019-20 police budget. I'm requesting $65,000 to be transferred from the police fund balance to cover the predicted shortage amount in the repair and maintenance line item of the budget. There were unforeseen expensive heating and cooling repairs that had to be done. In addition, the rear employee parking lot lights were changed to LED for better visibility and safety. In the past year, 2 police officers in the U.S. have been ambushed and killed by attackers in police parking lots. The LED lights are brighter and have eliminated the dark areas. The light poles were also rusting out and needed to be replaced. Thank you for your prompt consideration in this matter. Sincerely, Fred Posovitz, Chief of Police.
Thank you. And we did meet with the Budget Ways and Means Committee, and it was unanimously voted by everyone in the room that we needed to do this, and we needed to do it now. The building is getting older, and not to do it now would cause much more expense at a later date.
So moved.
Support.
Thank you.
Mr. Keenan.
Mr. Keys?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Cannon. I just want to say to the Chief, I know that in the committee you had talked about the much-needed improvement, but I just think that on Groesbeck, everyone's going to appreciate, or has appreciated, the increase in lighting because it's so dark on Groesbeck, especially around that area, that it's been an improvement for everybody. So I'm really excited about that part of the project.
I am too. In fact, years ago, when some of the board members wanted to put the police station right outside here by where the library is now, I was opposed to it because I wanted that beacon of security to be in the middle of the township. And it has helped with economic redevelopment in the area too, because it brought some utilities that way. So thank you.
So I will mention that part of our discussion at Budget Ways and Means was, one, that we just recently paid off the police building, so the bonds are now retired, and so this becomes sort of the thing that we now deal with, right? Boiler replacement and things like that. But I think we just need to be mindful and be careful that we're not throwing good money after bad, because we've got outdated systems, we've got, things that, aren't as efficient as, what is coming on the market now. And so, it's part of, I think, our new normal is that the bonds are now paid off, but now this maintenance cost becomes part of
Which is the reason for the LED lights.
Right. Yeah. Well, those are certainly saving money, but in terms of energy, yeah.
Mrs. West?
May I ask a quick question? Should we read the Budget Ways and Means letter into the record?
Well,
Because it really doesn't. The chief's just talks about the lighting. It doesn't talk about the camera
I
system,
think, Mrs.
the
Meltzer,
efficiency belt.
part of that
boiler.
should be the middle part where it gives you the budget.
I'll read the top part and that. On Tuesday, January 7th, 2020, the Budget Ways and Means Committee met with Chief Posovitz to discuss maintenance and repairs that have been done at the police headquarters. The costs of the repairs have been listed in detail below for your review. The committee unanimously voted to approve the budget to be amended for the repairs, as well as directed to have the boiler issues presented to the Township Building Committee for further review into the problem. So this would amend the capital outlay budget for $26,700 for parking lot LED canopy lights, $32,150 for building camera system, $91,200 new high-efficiency boiler, at a total of $150,050. And then also amend repair and maintenance budget for the boiler repairs as an additional $10,000. So that's what we discussed at Budget Ways and Means. And the letter that the chief he summarized it, but basically I thought it was important to read the fact that if we're in a situation where law enforcement are at increased risk, that's something we have to address immediately and make sure it's done, and I wanted to make sure that that was noted in this letter.
Thank you.
I concur with that, for sure. Thank you.
We have a motion on the floor.
We do, and we're all set.
Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Pearl?
Yes.
Mr. Keys?
Yes.
Mrs. West?
Yes.
Mr. Cannon?
Yes,
Mr. Aragona?
Yes.
Mr. Gilliam?
Yes.
Mrs. Mauser, yes, motion passes.
thank you. Item 8, economic development position.
Dear Township Board members, cities and townships always seek to expand and diversify their tax bases. A new business opening or an existing business expanding are beneficial to local economy. These events bring additional tax revenue and provide citizens with new employment opportunities. There are major implications for local government when a municipality has vacant commercial buildings along major highways and some major employers in town struggling. To avoid such a situation, economic development personnel work to strengthen their local economy and diversify their municipalities' tax bases. They recruit new businesses, retain existing ones, and assist businesses when they can expand operations locally. Economic development personnel should have a strategic focus. While they deal with individual businesses in individual situations, they maintain a macro-level perspective on the city's economy. Economic development personnel should study market trends and apply their expert judgment to opportunities and threats facing our local economy. This team member will be responsible for the coordination and execution of the township's economic development efforts to build a quality, diverse, and sustainable tax base. The position will work with employees and community partners, integrating economic, community resource, and land use programs into a viable working program to improve the physical and economic climate of Clinton Township. In closing, it is my belief that the township would greatly benefit from adding a full-time economic development position and look forward to our township staff facilitating the hiring of such a person in accordance to our hiring policies and procedures. Sincerely, Kenneth Pearl, trustee.
Thank you. I think years ago, we had positions that were similar to this, but not the same, so I'm glad you're bringing this forward. And even recently, in the city of Roseville, Denny's closed down, and the quote I heard or read from the city manager was he was going to get with the economic development department, not one person, to see what they could do to help fill that building. So, yeah, we need this position, so you have the floor.
Thank you. I hope the board agrees with me, and Mr. Cannon, you've already indicated, some of the problems that restaurants just close overnight. You read about it and go, nobody even told Roseville they were closing the Denny's after years and years of being there. Sterling Heights is faced with Lakeside closing a lot of their stores, and they need to bring in, guess what? They have an economic development department. To handle it.
Yeah.
We've authorized 2 major studies now, with the strategic plan and the Groesbeck Highway Market Study. Now we need to go forward with the next step in economic development. I've identified funds in our budget that will pay for it. We can discuss that in more detail later, but basically, we have no choice. We've got to stop the bleeding that's going on in Clinton Township with these retailers closing, businesses closing. We've got to bring somebody in. There's no way that Mr. Thompson and his staff has enough time to do everything. And I think other communities have found this out. If you look on the internet, number of communities are advertising for these people, and the others already have them. So I think it's about time that we take the next step, and I hope the board will authorize this position.
Okay. We'll have more comments, but I'll make a motion that we send your request to the Personnel Review Committee and bring it back to the board with a recommendation.
Support.
Discussion?
So is that the committee that's going to be dealing with some of the organizational elements of this position? So such as, is this going to be a position underneath our economic, or rather our planning director? Or is it going to be independent of that? Is it going to be in its own department? Is it going to be a part of the existing department? Are those things going to be worked out there?
Yes.
Okay.
And Mr. Smith will be leading the discussion, and Mr. Thompson will be in the room, of course.
Okay, and there was a reference to, and I get it, I'm certainly in support of this, because I know that sometimes you need to spend money in order to make money, quite frankly. But you did identify that there was a funding source for this, but didn't tell us what that funding source
Well,
was, and so.
In the budget, there's transfers that we're requesting, and we can detail that in the general fund once it comes up for discussion in the next budget year. But this
Okay.
is, there is funds that there is access and that could go into a capital improvement. I've talked to Mary Hine about it, and Mr. Cannon.
I have talked to her also.
Okay.
You know, So
And-
there is going to be enough money to pay for this and
Correct.
other projects.
Okay.
capital
And what's the
improvement
timeline coming out of the personal vacancy review committee, or is that?
projects. I would hope
discussed?
within 30 days, because they've already started working on it. Mr. Thompson's totally in support of this, and Bill Smith's already working on it and coming up, so they should be presenting a lot of information. We're just going through the normal procedures that the township goes through to hire somebody, to work out all the details.
For a new position,
contractual.
yeah.
Yeah, for a new position.
Right. I mean, usually those things are worked out in committee and then they come to the board, but I get sort of why we're here, and I agree with what we're doing. But, you know, in these types of situations, there's a lot of good ideas, but they don't necessarily even get this far. So I certainly appreciate the fact that we're all seem to be on board with this, partly because we see the reality. I mean, the reality is we've been a growing community for 40 years. And, you know, it used to come to us, and now we got to go out and fight for it. And we have a planning director who's, you know, working with the ZBA, who's working with the planning commission, who's working on site plan approvals, who's, you know, constantly bombarded with all of a whole minutia of details. And then we have an assistant director who's doing the community development block grant programs. And I don't know that there's the capacity within their office right now to focus specifically on the economic development
There
components.
is.
And so I'm supportive, but again, the details. And so I'll
I
be voting.
expect it in 30 days, Mr. Cannon, to come back
That
to
shouldn't be a
us.
Do you
problem.
want to make that as part of the motion, or?
I'm fine with that.
May I ask a question? So 30 days, the next Personnel Vacancy Review Committee meets, one moment, please, on the
20th?
February 20th.
Yeah.
February 20th. Should we move that up?
Yeah. Yeah.
Should we move that up?
As soon
to
as
the
they're ready.
6th to the 13th, something like that?
Okay, well, let's check our schedules.
Okay. Because I'm sure that I,
Make sure.
I don't want to delay this.
well, no, but I mean, if everything is in play, I mean, if you've got the job description together and all of that, for the 20th, there shouldn't be a
Here's what I
problem.
suggest,
But,
that tomorrow, everyone who's on the committee, let Mr. Smith know what days you are available,
okay,
so that we can put it together.
I'll do that.
All right. Well,
Thank you.
I'm happy to raise these issues. Thank you.
And that would include Mr. Thompson, we need you in attendance.
And that doesn't have to be on a Thursday, right, correct?
No, it doesn't.
I mean, I know they're generally hosted that day, but we don't have to do them
Yeah.
on that day.
No, and I mean, I can,
Okay.
Okay, roll call?
Mr. Cannon. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in full support of this, excited about making that investment. I think that one of the previous speakers tonight even, mentioned when businesses, or maybe it was Ms. West, when businesses see you make that investment, when industry leaders from outside our community see us making this, I think they're going to look at Clinton Township as an opportunity. And that's what we want to do. I remember my first conversation with Mr. Pearl about this issue at Apple Annie's on Garfield, where we talked about the need for this type of position. We see the county has an entire department that's doing this. And I remember meeting with the previous planning director and talking with him a little bit about Clinton Township's role. And it really was a conversation about, no, they come to us. We don't need to go very far to find them. And I really struggled with that mentality. And I remember even asking him, what about partnering with the county planners that are out there, these economic developers? And he said, well, we don't want to lose our identity. We want to keep it in-house. And I think that with our new planning director and a lot of the attitudes on this board have shifted, and I don't know if it's probably the dire situation that has really pushed that shift to go out and be more aggressive and not wait for opportunities, but really look at government as an opportunity to take a hand out to both industry and residents and create a community that everyone wants to be a part of. So I'm full support of this issue and excited about the opportunity to engage.
Thank you. Roll call.
Mr. Cannon?
Yes.
Mr. Keys?
Yes.
Mrs. West?
Yes.
Mr. Pearl?
Yes.
Mr. Aragona?
Yes.
Mr. Gilliam?
Yes.
Mrs. Melzer, yes, motion passes.
Thank you. And item 9, bid award, water main replacement project, Clinton River Road.
Dear board members, on December 23rd, 2019, the Charter Township of Clinton's Clerk's Office received and processed a total of 9 bids for the above referenced project. Our office checked the tabulation of the bids submitted, and the low bidder is TR Pipersack Company, Inc. of China Township, Michigan, in the bid total amount of $730,128. A copy of the final bid tabulations are attached with this letter. The project consists of the installation of a new 12-inch diameter transmission water main along Clinton River Road from Hayes Road to Garfield Road. This improvement will replace an aging 8-inch diameter water main on Clinton River Road. As a condition of the bid requirements, prospective bidders were required to be pre-qualified for water main replacement and horizontal directional drilling for water main or low-pressure sewers in existing residential or commercially developed areas. TR Pipersack Company, Inc. provided the necessary pre-qualification information to be considered for bid award. The bid results were reviewed with the Director of Public Services and Township personnel. Based upon the bids submitted and conditions noted above, we recommend that the water main replacement Clinton River Road be awarded to TR Pipersack Company, Inc., located at 6267 St. Clair Highway, China Township, Michigan, 48054, in the amount of $730,128. Sincerely, Scott Chabot, Senior Project Engineer from AEW.
Thank you. It's pretty straightforward, but Mr. Chabot is here if anyone has any questions.
I do, if I could. Is that going to, Mr. Chabot, will there be, I know the water main will be replaced, will that cause the road to be replaced as well in that area?
No, the work's outside the influence of the road.
Well, that's unfortunate, because Clinton River Road needs to be fixed too.
No, it'll be about, most of it's about 5 feet outside the shoulder.
It is, oh, okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. Pearl?
Scott, this is a main water, so the feeder is going to be refed from a different area while they're working on it?
That's correct. It comes up, there's other main connections up through Garfield. There's just, I believe it's a 16-inch that runs up Garfield that connects into where the booster station is.
Okay, has this contractor done work for us before?
Yeah, so actually they're going to be starting a project on Lipke tomorrow.
But they haven't done anything before?
Nothing recently, but I've worked with them up in Washington Township and some other communities as well.
Okay, thank you.
And they've been, we went, of course, through the pre-qualification process. And they've done a number of projects in the area recently.
Mrs. Bednar?
Mr. Pearl, I have worked with them over the past years. They didn't do a water main project, but they actually had a project with Macomb County Public Works on our Partridge Creek property. That stream, the drain that goes through there, the Glody drain that was restored and so forth, they were the contractor on that. So they've been in Clinton Township.
Thank you.
Are we asking that we approve the as-bid project cost of $730,128 or the total project budget of $871,772.83?
If I can address that, at this time, what you're approving is the contract cost for the $730,126. The budget cost is there because if you remember in the past, when we budgeted, the cost that was in the budget, and I'm talking in the past meaning 10 years ago plus, was just for the construction. Well, there's a lot of soft costs, the engineering costs, the easements, and so we show you the full budget. And when I budget for the full amount so that you know that the project is what's that. So the project cost is that. We do also include contingencies in that cost as well, the budget amount. But this would be what the contract's for, and then obviously there could be change orders or field changes, but this is what was bid on and the amount.
Okay. So we'll see that those other fees reflected in the current budget or the 2020 budget, or?
It just depends on when we've actually, some of those fees have been paid already to AEW for the engineering design.
Yep.
And so when you notice, if last year, if you looked at our budget that came forward to the board, you'd have 2 columns and you'd see that the money's been split. You'll have a similar thing, so you'll see where the money was split. And then sometimes these projects will go into even another year, depending on, in this case, I don't anticipate that because they're going to get going fairly quickly and so forth. But So I don't expect it to go into the 2022 budget. We should be done well before the end of 2021.
I'll make a motion that we approve the total as-bid project cost of $731.28, or $730,128 to, Mary, say the name of the company again?
Piper Zach.
Piper Zach.
Piper Zach
Piper Zach.
as the low bidder on the project.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Callahan?
Yes.
Mr. Pearl?
Yes.
Mrs. West?
Yes.
Mr. Keys?
Yes.
Mr. Cannon?
Yes.
Mr. Aragona?
Yes.
Mrs. Melcher, yes. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 10, request to adopt resolution for a moratorium on approving storage facilities and direct planning director to commence forthwith revising the ordinance for storage facilities. And this is put on by myself, and at the same time that I was putting this together, Mr. Aragona was working on the same thing, so this is really from him also.
Dear members of the board, Clinton Township has numerous storage facility businesses. This is a $75 billion industry in the United States, and we are seeing these businesses pop up all over Macomb County. At this time, we are requesting a moratorium on storage facilities so we can work with staff to grapple with this trend. Sincerely, Robert Cannon, Supervisor, and Joseph Aragona, Trustee.
As everyone knows, we have 21 or 22 in our community right now, and it seems like 1 out of every 10 households throughout the country has some sort of self-storage unit. So it was growing for a while. I'm not sure how long it's going to continue to grow. So all we're asking for is to take a step back and take a look at it for a minute and investigate where these locations, should they be in Clinton Township, where should they be, and maybe tighten it up a little bit, and give our planning director 120 days with a moratorium to come back with some recommendation. If a property owner believes that we're hurting them somehow by doing this, they have the right to appear before the township board and state their case. So this came about, as some of you know, from the last meeting where Baker College wanted us to rezone the back part of their property on Gratiot Avenue for possibly self-storage. The fact of the matter is the other part of the property today, the way it's zoned, could be self-storage. I'm not sure if the property has been purchased yet, Mr. Dolan. Does that make a difference in whether or not they're part of the moratorium or not? Because we don't have any site plans, we don't have anything on paper from them indicating what they intend to do with the property, just word of mouth.
Right. In response, Mr. Cannon, as drafted, I believe the moratorium would apply.
Good.
But as you noted, there is a process within there to the extent that there was some party felt aggrieved and they felt that they had lost the substantial total use of the property. There was a process in the moratorium.
Does a person who doesn't own property have any standing on that piece of property?
I think what would have to occur is the owner of the property in conjunction with the prospective purchaser would have to come before the board.
Thank you.
You have to have some interest to really have standing with regard to property interests.
Thank you. Mrs. Meltzer and myself have met with the group, and we're hoping that possibly something could happen. Mr. Gillingham and Mr. Thompson and I have been on the phone with the planning director of the county. The planning director is meeting soon with not only the local Baker College representatives, but the higher-ups. So we are hoping to get some more direction from Baker. That's an aside to this, because this is the blanket.
Right.
But what prompted it was the Baker College site. Mr. Aragona?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Supervisor. Just a couple of quick things. Since joining the board, we've had a couple of these come before us, more than a couple, come before us. And to have some storage facilities throughout the township, okay, that's fine. You know, people need storage facilities. I understand that. But it seems like we were getting an overabundance of them. And there's quite a few on Gratiot. There's also, Groesbeck. There's also quite a few on Hall Road. And I keep saying this, nobody's ever going to look at Clinton Township and say, man, those guys got great storage facilities. I should move to Clinton Township. It's not going to happen. And we don't want to become storage facility heavy. So I really wanted this item on this agenda to kind of coincide with the M97 corridor study and the marketing plan that's going to come out of that. So I'm glad we're doing this. I think a moratorium for the length of time we have, we can't do it indefinitely. We've talked with Mr. Dolan about it. We can't do it indefinitely. But if we can get some information out of that M97 marketing plan and corridor study, I think we're going to get a lot of good, useful information out of that to see how we proceed forward with storage facilities. Maybe that study comes back. I don't think it will, but maybe that study, if that study were to come back and say, yeah, you should have storage facilities all up and down there, I think then we got to address it as a board and say, well, what do we want? What do we want the township to look like? I've said it before, I think storage facilities in Clinton Township should be something in an I district, in an I zone. But I don't want to just blanketly say that and move forward with that. I think it's good if we have some backup to that, some argument behind that. And I think with the corridor study, and actually even with the strategic plan, I think there will be some good information coming out of that that we'll be able to use after this moratorium is over.
So, and I think, and just to state, Mr. Supervisor and members of the board, I'm very much in support of this. And this is really where this whole, like, all these agenda items almost come full circle. You know, we start with the fact that we have the need for a study on Groesbeck. We have a discussion on the need for an economic development coordinator for the township because we need to begin to figure out where we're at, and then we're being bombarded with storage facilities. And there was this discussion from Sterling Heights that, you know, all retail is, you know, changing, and new owners come in for Lakeside Mall, and there's this, and I've said this at a couple board meetings ago, there's this discussion of the new owners are going to work directly with the economic development team in Sterling Heights to reimagine and revision what that property is going to look like. And then we come to Clinton Township, where Baker College, which has been a great anchor for higher education in a place where we are the largest county in the state and the third largest county in the nation without a publicly supported four-year institution of higher learning. And we've had to rely on Baker, and now Baker is selling their property on Gratiot and out initiating conversations we're having to go through the county to get and have those conversations. This is, we need to communicate and send a strong message that it's important that the redevelopment of businesses and the creation of corridors and how we grow as a community, that we have a voice in that, because we're speaking on behalf of constituents that are saying, these are the things we want you to do. So,
Well, that's exactly what we did 2 weeks ago when we denied the rezoning.
yep.
We postponed it.
Well, correct.
Well, I want to be careful what we say here, because there's also a letter, you know, with a major FOIA that's talking about a bunch of things here. But, you know, this is where, again, it's not motivated by one thing, it's motivated by a whole series of things. So.
Mr. Keys?
Yeah, this entire agenda, but this item specifically, I reflect on how far we've come. It was just a year ago that this board was approving variances for the storage facility on Groesbeck and the second phase of the one on Gratiot. And I remember talking at this board meeting at the need to try to limit these facilities, and even more importantly, keep the standard when it comes to the ones on Hall Road versus the one on Gratiot or Groesbeck. Because what we're seeing specifically on Groesbeck, and Mr. Aragona, I appreciate you saying that that was one of the reasons that you wanted to bring this forward, is it was Groesbeck, is that we're not building these indoor climate-controlled 4-6-story beautiful facade landscape buildings. We're building sprawled-out outdoor units that really don't provide that quality of life to our residents. So, you know, that's why I voted against that storage facility on Groesbeck, where the old bowling alley was, because that's not what we need there. That's not what this community needs. And I know that project's already moving forward, but I appreciate this board taking a different approach after, you know, just a year. Look how far we've come, and we're making Groesbeck, Gratiot, economic development a priority here. So, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Is there a motion on the floor?
So moved.
Support.
Roll call, please.
Oh, Mr. Bichelle.
Oh,
Mr.
did you-
Pearl?
oh, excuse me. Did you wish to speak?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Sam Bushel, 18546 Wayland. I think it's a great idea to have the moratorium, and I think, the fact that Baker College, just to one reiteration, the only reason to rezone that back part of Baker College is to get rid of the dental school, not keep it, because it's in the proper zoning already. Thank you.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Pearl?
Mr., but before we take the roll call, can we just clarify that the motion made was so moved, so I'm just clarifying for the record that it's moved consistent with the heading of the agenda item, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, right,
With-
correct.
But with 120 days
Correct.
added, which is not in the heading.
Well, no, it's not in the heading, but it's in the
It's in the
Okay, yeah.
resolution.
resolution he's got there.
Okay.
I agree with Mr. Argona. Some things are said that are not correct, but he has the right to say it. Roll call, please.
Mr. Pearl?
Yes.
Mr. Keys?
Yes.
Mrs. West? Mr. Cannon?
Yes,
Mr. Aragona?
Yes.
Mr. Gilliam?
Yes.
Mrs. Melter, yes, motion passes.
thank you. Approval of the minutes of the January 6th regular Township Board meeting.
So moved, and unless there are changes?
Is there a second? Well, second by Mr. Gilham. Roll call, please.
Mrs. West?
Yes.
Mr. Gilliam?
Yes.
Mr. Keys?
Yes.
Mr. Pearl?
Yes.
Mr. Cannon?
Yes.
Mr. Aragona?
Yes.
Mrs. Melter, yes, motion passes.
Approval of the minutes of the January 9th special Township Board meeting.
So moved.
Support.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Melter, yes. Mr. Aragona?
Yes.
Mrs. West?
Yes.
Mr. Keys?
Yes.
Mr. Pearl?
Yes.
Mr. Cannon?
Yes.
Mr. Gilliam?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Approval of the bills.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Keys?
Yes.
Mrs. Melter, yes. Mrs. West?
Yes.
Mr. Pearl?
Yes.
Mr. Cannon?
Yes.
Mr. Aragona?
Yes.
Mr. Gilliam?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Chief, do we have any public comments?
What?
Well, I saw a piece of paper on my desk. Is that your public comment card?
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay. Okay.
Sam Bushel, 18546 Wayland. I'm here, what I wanted to comment about is that if anybody wanted to watch the ZBA meetings, they always open with the chairman going over what the stipulation is, what's required to get a variance. And the part of it is they can't be self-caused, they can't be just financial. They, basically, when you look at, there again, storage, that you have Velic Transportation that came in for outdoor storage, a new site plan, but with outdoor storage. And with the motion is on, you could look at the tape. No hardships of any kind were stipulated in the motion. But on top of that, there is wiring that goes partway through the lot. One of the things that the petitioner had talked about was high-powered lines down the center of the lot. Well, as it turned out, the owner of the property to the north, her father had owned the whole thing there, and he had those wires put in back there, so it would be a self-made problem, and that was so they would be behind the restaurant that was there that's been torn down. So those wires, and they're not on any type of a public utility, they don't have a public utility easement there. They're strictly privately owned wires. And so basically, for a new site plan, they should move them. There's not a requirement for a variance. The other thing they wanted the variance of was the screening required for storage. We're talking about storage tonight. There was no hardship or any practical difficulty of any kind stated for them to get rid of the required screening. And it was granted anyways. And when you look at the site plan as it was, and I'm not sure if this is the way it looked at the Planning Commission, because I didn't notice it at the Planning Commission, but at the ZBA, they have one part of the property that's going to be a grandfathered use of it. It's a different lot on the property. And it's got the cell tower in there. The property is just being overdeveloped. And the fact that on the grandfathered property, the gravelled area that's behind it is literally fenced off from the grandfathered use of the buildings that are there. And so this gravelled lot is going to be open to their storage. It's open to their storage area. It is not open to the building that's grandfathered. I think this has to be looked into. I think the attorney would have to be the one to say, can the ZBA even grant a variance when there is no hardship and there's no practical difficulty? Thank you.
A motion to adjourn is in order.
So moved.
Support.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Keys?
Yes.
Mrs. West?
Yes.
Mr. Pearl?
Yes.
Mr. Cannon?
Yes.
Mr. Aragona?
Yes.
Mr. Gilliam?
Yes.
Mrs. Melter, yes. Motion passes.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned.